The sound was a physical thing, a brutal symphony of physics gone wrong that slammed into Maya Castillo's small sedan and seemed to vibrate in her bones. It was a sound of finality, of things breaking that were never meant to break. First, the high, tortured screech of tires fighting a losing battle against rain-slicked asphalt. Then, a percussive, deafening crunch of metal compressing, followed by the crystalline shatter of 100 windows returning to sand. Friday night. 9:13. The rain wasn't just falling. It was a vertical river, a solid wall of water that the wipers fought against in a frantic, hypnotic rhythm. For Maya, the Overland Bridge was the last major hurdle on her commute home, a grim, aging steel artery that connected the city's bustling heart to the quieter, more affordable suburbs where she lived. After a 12-hour shift in the chaotic whirlwind of St. Waitian, Jude's General Hospital's emergency room, all she craved was the holy trinity of the exhausted, a microwave meal, a mindless television show, and the blessed oblivion of sleep. Her world, a moment ago filled with the mundane thoughts of a tired nurse, had just been violently upended. Ahead of her, the red taillights of the number 14 city busa, familiar sight on this route, had suddenly lurched sideways. It was a grotesque, unnatural movement, like a giant beast stumbling. The bus had swerved, its massive frame sliding across the wet road before impacting the concrete barrier with a grinding roar. For one terrifying suspended moment, it teetered, half on the bridge, half over the black, churning river below. Then, with a final, soul-sickening groan of tortured steel, it punched through the corroded guardrail, its back half swinging out over the abyss. Maya's foot slammed on the brake, her nursing instincts overriding the civilian impulse to panic. Her beat-up sedan shuddered to a halt a safe distance away, the engine still humming. Behind her, a cacophony of squealing tires and smaller, percussive thuds signaled a chain reaction of near misses and fender benders. But her focus was entirely forward, locked on the horrifying tableau. The bus was a wounded creature, precariously balanced. Its front wheels were still on the bridge, but the majority of its immense weight was hanging over the churning darkness of the Northgate River. Rain poured through its shattered windows. The scene was bathed in the hellish, pulsing glow of her own headlights and the intermittent flashes of lightning that illuminated the sky. "Oh God, oh no," she whispered, her breath fogging the inside of her windshield. The exhaustion of her long shift evaporated, replaced by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. Her mind, trained to assess and act, began to work with terrifying speed and clarity. Bus, dangling, multiple vehicles, rain, darkness, mass casualty incident. The thought was clinical, detached from the horror of the situation. It was a diagnosis, and the diagnosis demanded a response. She didn't hesitate. She threw the car into park, ripped the keys from the ignition, and leaned over to the passenger seat. Her hands, surprisingly steady, dove into her worn leather nursing bag, the one she carried everywhere out of habit. She pulled out her trauma shears, a small pen light, and a box of nitrile gloves. She grabbed her cell phone, her thumb already dialing. 911? "Yes, this is an emergency," she said, her voice a sharp, clear contrast to the chaos outside. "Mass casualty incident. MCI. A city bus, I think it's the number 14, has crashed through the guardrail on the Overland Bridge, eastbound lane. It's partially hanging over the river. Multiple other vehicles are involved. I can see multiple critical injuries from here." She paused, taking a breath. "I am a registered nurse, and I am on scene. I am initiating triage now." She didn't wait for the dispatcher's scripted response. She ended the call, shoved the phone deep into the pocket of her jeans, and pushed open her car door. The wind and rain hit her like a physical blow, plastering her dark hair to her face and soaking her thin jacket in seconds. Other drivers were emerging from their cars now, their faces ghost white in the strobing headlights, a mixture of shock, fear, and morbid curiosity. Some were shouting into their own phones, their voices swallowed by the storm. Others just stood, paralyzed, staring at the mangled bus. Maya moved with a purpose that seemed alien in the disoriented crowd. She squeezed between two stopped cars, her eyes scanning, assessing. A man with a bloody gash on his forehead stumbled towards her, his eyes wide and unfocused. "Are you hurt? Can you move?" she asked, her voice sharp but not unkind. He just nodded mutely, his gaze fixed on the dangling bus. She reached the jagged maw where the guardrail used to be. The wind howled with a mournful, hollow sound as it whipped through the bridge's steel framework. The bus groaned again, a deep, metallic sound that sent a fresh wave of fear through the onlookers. The air was thick with the acrid smell of diesel fuel and something else, something coppery and cloying that she knew all too well from the ER blood. There was no one else helping. No sirens yet, just the victims, the onlookers, and her. Her father's voice, a memory from a decade ago, echoed in her mind. "You have to see the person, Miha." She saw dozens of them, trapped in that metal shell. Without a second thought for her own safety, she clambered over the twisted, sharp-edged remnants of the guardrail. The ground was slick with rain and oil. She made her way to the rear door of the bus, which was jammed partially open, offering the only viable point of entry. Hoisting herself up and inside was like entering a circle of hell. The interior was a mangled landscape of chaos. Seats were ripped from their floor mounts, luggage and personal belongings were strewn everywhere, and the emergency lights flickered erratically, casting long, dancing shadows that made everything seem to move. The bus was tilted at a severe angle, making every step treacherous, and the sounds were the worst part. The ragged, shallow breathing of the unconscious, the choked sobs of the terrified, and the low, continuous moans of those in unbearable pain. Maya took a deep, steadying breath, pulling on her gloves. The latex snapped crisply at her wrists, a familiar sound that grounded her. She clicked on her penlight, its small, focused beam a tiny sword against the oppressive darkness. "Can anyone hear me?" Her voice cut through the din, calmer and more authoritative than she felt. "My name is Maya. I'm a nurse. I'm here to help you." A few heads turned, a flicker of hope in the eyes of a young woman clutching a bleeding arm. A muffled response from somewhere in the back. She moved quickly, her mind a running checklist of triage protocols. She found a permanent marker in her purse and began tearing strips of fabric from a fallen curtain to use as makeshift tags. Green for the walking wounded, yellow for serious but not immediately life-threatening, red for critical, and black for the deceased. Her light fell on a young boy, no older than 7, pinned beneath a collapsed section of seating. His face was pale, his breathing rapid and wheezing. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "What's your name?" "Leo," he whimpered, tears tracing clean paths through the grime on his cheeks. "Okay, Leo, I'm Maya. We're going to get you out of here. Does it hurt anywhere?" As he pointed to his leg, she could hear the distinct sound of an asthma attack. "Leo, do you have an inhaler? A puffer?" He nodded weakly, gesturing towards a small backpack a few feet away. She retrieved it, found the albuterol inhaler, and helped him take a deep puff. His wheezing eased slightly. His leg was a problem, but his breathing was the immediate threat. She marked a red tag and tucked it into his jacket pocket. She moved on. The woman with the bleeding arm direct pressure, elevate, yellow tag. An elderly man, slumped in his seat, his head at an unnatural angle, his skin cool and waxy. She felt for a carotid pulse. Nothing. With a pang of sorrow that she had to immediately suppress, she marked him with a black tag. There was no time for grief. Then she saw him, a man in his late 40s, dressed in a business suit, now soaked and stained. He was slumped against a shattered window, his eyes closed. A dark, bubbling stain was spreading across his white shirt. Her penlight illuminated the cause. A jagged shard of metal from the window frame was embedded deep in his chest. With each of his shallow, gasping breaths, she heard a faint but unmistakable sucking sound. Her blood ran cold. Sucking chest wound. The air was being pulled into his chest cavity through the hole, collapsing his lung, putting pressure on his heart. A tension pneumothorax was developing. He had minutes, maybe less. Standard procedure was a sterile occlusive dressing, a chest tube, a surgeon. She had none of that. She had her wits and a bag full of everyday items. Her eyes darted around the debris-strewn floor. A plastic grocery bag caught on a twisted seat leg. A roll of heavy-duty duct tape in the driver's emergency kit, which had spilled its contents nearby. An idea, born of desperation and knowledge, took hold. It was a flagrant violation of every protocol she had ever learned. It was unsterile, improvised, and risky. But it was his only chance. "Sir," she said to another passenger, a man who was dazed but conscious. "I need your help. I need you to hold his head steady. Don't let him move, okay?" The man nodded, his eyes wide with fear, and gently cupped the injured man's head. With swift, decisive movements, Maya tore open the plastic bag. She carefully cut away the man's shirt around the wound, exposing the grisly injury. Using the plastic, she created a makeshift seal, taping it down securely on 3 sides, leaving the bottom edge free. It was a flutter valve, a crude one-way door. It would stop more air from getting in, while hopefully allowing the air already trapped inside to escape. As she pressed the final piece of tape into place, she thought she heard the man's breathing become marginally less strained. It had been 10 minutes, an eternity of life and death decisions. And then, finally, the distant but growing wail of sirens, hope, sharp and piercing, cut through her focused adrenaline. The first firefighters in full turnout gear stormed the bus, their movements practiced and efficient. One of them, a broad, imposing man with a helmet that obscured his face, and Chief emblazoned across his chest, took charge. This was Fire Chief Frank Brody. He saw the scene not as a collection of hurting people, but as a compromised zone of operations. He saw Maya, kneeling beside the man with the chest wound, adjusting her makeshift dressing, and his face hardened. "Who the hell are you?" Brody's voice boomed, a tidal wave of authority. "Get out of my way! This is a controlled scene!" Maya looked up, her face streaked with rain, her hands covered in a stranger's blood. She didn't flinch. "That man needs a chest tube. He has a likely tension pneumothorax," she said, her voice steady, pointing. "This woman over here has a suspected pelvic fracture. Don't move her without a backboard. I've triaged 7 red tags." Brody strode towards her, his boots crunching on shattered glass. He saw a civilian, an obstacle. He grabbed her by the arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "I don't care who you are or what you think you've done," he snarled, his voice low and furious. "You have compromised this entire scene. You're out, now." Paramedics, following his lead, brushed past her as if she were a piece of debris. They began working on the very patients she had just stabilized, their movements efficient, but without the context she held in her head. "But the boy, Leo, he's still pinned," she tried to explain, her voice rising. "And the man with the chest wound, the SEAL." Brody physically maneuvered her towards the door. "My team knows what they're doing. You need to stand back and let the professionals handle this." She was escorted off the bus, a firm hand on her back, and left standing on the slick roadway. She shivered, not just from the cold rain, but from the icy shock of the dismissal. She watched as the first responders she had so desperately waited for took over, her contributions erased, her presence deemed an annoyance. The adrenaline began to fade, leaving a hollow ache of disbelief and a profound, sinking sense of wrongness. She had done her job, she had been a nurse, and she had been treated like a criminal. Hours later, the steam from her shower did little to warm the chill that had settled deep in her bones. The water ran pink at her feet, a testament to the night's work, but the memory of Chief Brody's contemptuous glare was a stain that wouldn't wash away. She stepped out, wrapping a towel around herself, and saw her phone blinking on the nightstand. A text message. It was from her nursing supervisor, Brenda. "Maya, Dr. Finch wants to see you first thing in the morning, before your scheduled shift." Dr. Alistair Finch, the chief of emergency medicine, a man whose demeanor was as cold and sterile as his meticulously organized office, a man who valued protocol above all else. A knot of apprehension tightened in Maya's stomach. This couldn't be good. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary from the relentless demands of the hospital, felt small and suffocating. Her thoughts drifted back, as they often did in moments of stress, to the reason she'd chosen this life. The memory was sepia-toned with age but sharp in its emotional detail. She was 16, sitting on a hard plastic chair in a hospital waiting room, her father's hand clutching hers. Inside a room down the hall, her mother was fighting a losing battle against a post-operative infection that should have been preventable. She remembered the hurried doctors with their tired eyes and incomprehensible jargon, the nurses who were always too busy to answer their questions, the growing dread that thickened the air with each passing hour. And then, the final, sterile silence of the room, the flat line on the monitor, the quiet, devastating finality of it all. Later, in the hollowed-out quiet of their home, her father had held her close. "They didn't see her, Mija," he had whispered, his voice thick with a grief so profound it seemed to have weight. "They just saw a chart, a set of numbers. You have to see the person, every single one of them." Those words had become her creed. They fueled her through the grueling years of nursing school, the mountains of student debt, and the often thankless, exhausting shifts at St. Jude's. She saw the person. She saw it in the elderly man scared of his diagnosis, in the frightened child with a broken arm, in the panicked parent in the waiting room. But St. Jude's, like any large institution, had its own cold logic. Just last week, she had been publicly reprimanded by Dr. Pointe-Viologs Finch for questioning a medication dosage he'd ordered for a patient with renal failure. She had been right the dosage was dangerously high for someone with compromised kidneys, but Finch had dressed her down in the middle of the nurse's station for undermining authority. He'd changed the order quietly later, without a word of acknowledgement. It was a system that demanded obedience, often at the expense of initiative. And Maya, driven by her father's words, was all initiative. The next morning, she stood before Dr. Finch's imposing mahogany desk, the memory of that reprimand fresh in her mind. He was not alone. Beside him sat a woman in a severe gray suit whose expression was even colder than Finch's. Miss Davies, the hospital's head of legal counsel. "Miss Castillo, thank you for coming in," Finch began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "I understand you were involved in the incident on the Overland Bridge last night." "Yes, sir," Maya said, a flicker of hope trying to ignite within her. "I saw the crash. I felt it was my duty to—" Finch held up a hand, silencing her. "Quite. While we appreciate your impulse to assist, Ms. Castillo, we have a rather serious problem." The lawyer, Ms. Davies, spoke for the first time, her voice as sharp as the crease in her suit. "Ms. Castillo, you acted entirely outside the scope of your employment. You were off duty. Your unauthorized intervention has exposed you, and by extension, this hospital to immense potential liability." Maya stared, her mind struggling to process the words. "Liability? People were dying. I triaged the injured. I stabilized the most critical ones. I think I saved at least one life." Finch leaned forward, his eyes like chips of ice. "What if that improvised chest seal you applied had failed, Miss Castillo? What if it had introduced a fatal infection? What if you moved someone with an unstable spinal injury and paralyzed them? Your job was to call 911 and wait. You played God. And in doing so, you have placed this hospital in a precarious legal position." "I'm a nurse," Maya whispered, the words feeling hollow in the oppressive silence of the office. "My duty is to help." "Your duty is to follow protocol," Finch corrected, his voice sharp. "Effective immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending a full review by the board. Please surrender your hospital ID." He extended his hand. The gesture was impersonal, final. Numbly, Maya reached into her bag, her fingers fumbling with her wallet. She pulled out the plastic ID card with her picture on it, a smiling, hopeful version of herself from 2 years ago. It felt like a lifetime away. She placed it on the polished desk. The small plastic rectangle looked insignificant, but it was her livelihood, her identity. She left the office in a daze, the lawyer's parting words echoing in her ears. "You are advised to refrain from discussing this matter with anyone." Her next stop was the police precinct, a summons she had to obey. She gave her statement to a young, earnest officer named Miller, who seemed sympathetic. But then, Chief Brody entered the room, his face a thundercloud of righteous indignation. He informed her, in no uncertain terms, that she was under investigation for interfering with an emergency rescue and practicing medicine without authority. "That plastic bag on a chest wound?" Brody sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "You're lucky you're not in handcuffs. We don't know what damage you did before my team could get there." "Damage?" Maya's voice shook with a rage she could no longer contain. "I kept that man alive. Ask the surgeon who operated on him." "That's for a doctor to decide," Brody shot back. "Not a nurse playing hero. Get a lawyer." She stumbled out of the precinct and into the harsh light of midday, her world crumbling around her. And then, it got worse. Sitting in her car, she saw the notification on her phone. A breaking news alert from Channel 8. The face of Sharon Vance, a local reporter known for her shark-like pursuit of sensationalism, filled the small screen. "Questions arise about an unidentified woman's interference at last night's tragic bus crash," Vance said, her voice grave. A grainy, unflattering photo of Maya, taken by a bystander, flashed on the screen. She looked frantic, her face smudged with blood. The chyron beneath read, "Reckless amateur or good Samaritan?" Vance quoted an anonymous source within the NFD who claimed a civilian had complicated the rescue. The implication was clear. Maya was the villain of the story. The backlash was immediate and brutal. The online comment section of the news article was a cesspool of vitriol. Hero complex. Sue her for everything she's got. Should be in jail. Her name, which had been leaked somehow, was everywhere. Her phone rang. It was her landlord. Ms. Castillo, I saw the news. I don't want any controversy. There's a morality clause in the lease. I'm giving you 30 days notice. Click. Another call. The student loan provider. Her employment status had been flagged. Her deferment was at risk. They wanted answers. By 4 o'clock that afternoon, Maya was curled up on her sofa, the curtains drawn, the world outside a terrifying monster. She had lost her job, her reputation, and soon, her home. All for doing what she believed was right. The city that would one day name a bridge after her was, in that moment, intent on destroying her. The silence in her apartment was absolute, broken only by her own ragged breaths. Then, a knock on the door. Tentative, soft. Her first instinct was to ignore it, to retreat further into her shell. But something made her get up. She peered through the peephole and saw a young woman she didn't recognize, her face streaked with tears. With a sense of trepidation, Maya opened the door a crack. "Are you Maya Castillo?" the woman asked, her voice choked. Maya nodded cautiously. "My name is Sarah," the woman said, fresh tears welling in her eyes. "My father, he was on the bus, the man with the medal in his chest." Maya's heart stopped. "Is he? He's alive," Sarah sobbed, a wave of relief and gratitude washing over her face. "He's going to be okay, and it's because of you." She took a shaky breath. "The surgeon, a doctor, Rostova, she told me to find you. She said that plastic bag you taped to his chest was a work of genius. She said it was the only reason he was still alive when the ambulance got to the hospital." Sarah reached out and impulsively hugged Maya. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saving my dad." For the first time in 24 hours, Maya cried. Not tears of fear or despair, but tears of profound, soul-shaking relief. One person knew the truth. And in that moment it was enough. Sarah, fueled by a daughter's fierce love and righteous anger, refused to let it rest. That evening she posted her story on social media. It was a raw, emotional account of her father's ordeal, and Dr. Dax P. Rostova's praise for the anonymous nurse who had saved him. She included a picture of her holding her father's hand in his ICU bed, the monitors beeping steadily in the background. She ended the post with a simple, powerful hashtag, "Thank you, Nurse Maya." The post was a single stone tossed into a vast, murky pond, but the ripples began to spread. The father of Leo, the asthmatic boy, saw the post and added his own story. Then the woman with the fractured arm. One by one, the voices of the saved and their families began to build a counter-narrative, a chorus of gratitude that pushed back against the tide of slander. Inside St. Jude's, Dr. Eva Rostova, the brilliant and notoriously cantankerous trauma surgeon, read the news reports with a cynical scowl. She had seen the patient, Sarah's father, and knew the intervention on the bridge had been nothing short of miraculous. The hospital's cowardly, self-preserving silence disgusted her. She pulled up the man's chart, along with the charts of the other crash victims. The medical facts were undeniable. The triage had been perfect. The interventions, however unorthodox, had been life-saving. Anonymously, using an encrypted email, she sent the relevant damning excerpts from the charts to a journalist she trusted at the Northgate Chronicle, the city's most respected paper. Miles away, in a quiet suburban home, Officer Miller couldn't sleep. Chief Brody's smug face and Maya's terrified but determined one were seared into his memory. He pulled up his body cam footage from the night before. It was all there. Brody's unprofessional rage, Maya's calm and lucid explanations, the clear evidence of a hero being bullied by a bureaucrat. His conscience won the war with his fear of reprisal. He too sent a copy of the footage to the same journalist at the Chronicle. Sunday morning dawned, gray and overcast. But for Maya, a storm was about to break in her favor. At 9:00 a.m., the Northgate Chronicle published its story. The headline was an earthquake. Bodycam footage and leaked hospital records prove off. Duty nurse is a hero. Fire chief. Hospital accused of cover-up. The article was a devastating, meticulous takedown of the official narrative. It had the video, the medical records, and the powerful, first-hand accounts from the families. It went viral. The city's collective outrage turned on a dime, redirected with volcanic force at Chief Brody, Sharon Vance, and St. Jude's Hospital. The fallout was swift and brutal. Fire Sharon Vance trended as her station put her on indefinite leave. City manager Marcus Thorne, a politician who could sense a public relations tsunami when he saw one, immediately suspended Chief Brody and announced a full investigation. At St. Jude's, Dr. Finch faced a full-blown mutiny. Led by a newly emboldened Dr. Rostova, the nursing staff threatened a walkout in solidarity with Maya. Donors began calling, threatening to pull their funding. By 2:00 p.m., a humiliated Dr. Finch stood at a hastily assembled press conference. He read from a prepared statement, his voice tight with forced contrition, calling Maya's actions heroic and in the highest tradition of her profession. He publicly offered her her job back, along with a promotion to charge nurse and a significant raise. As the afternoon sun finally broke through the clouds, a massive, impromptu crowd gathered at City Hall. They carried signs, "Northgate's hero, thank you Nurse Maya." A local councilwoman, seeing the immense political capital, invited Maya to speak. Someone handed her a megaphone. She looked out at the sea of supportive faces, her heart pounding. She took a breath, and her voice, clear and steady, carried over the crowd. "Thank you," she began. "Last night I was just trying to help. I did what I was trained to do. What any nurse, any doctor, any decent person would have done. This isn't about me. It's about a system that sometimes gets so tangled up in its own rules that it forgets why it exists. It forgets to see the person." Her father's words. "Let's support our first responders, yes, but let's also empower every citizen to do the right thing, to help when they can, without fear. Let's reward compassion, not punish it." The crowd erupted in a roar of approval. It was a moment of pure, cathartic vindication. That evening, City Manager Marcus Thorne, in a masterful act of political jujitsu, called an emergency city council session. He needed a grand gesture, something to transform him from a bystander into a champion of the city's newfound hero. "The Overland Bridge has stood for 80 years, he declared, his voice ringing with manufactured passion. "Last night, it was a scene of tragedy. But today, thanks to the heroic actions of Maya Castillo, it has become a symbol of our city's resilience, compassion, and courage. I propose we immediately and unanimously vote to rename it. Let it forever be known as the Maya Castillo Bridge." The motion passed in a whirlwind of cheering and applause. 24 hours, a single turn of the earth. In that time, Maya Castillo had gone from a tired, anonymous nurse to a selfless hero, to a vilified outcast, and now to a citywide symbol. The dedication ceremony took place the next evening, almost exactly 24 hours after the crash. A temporary sign was unveiled. Maya stood there, overwhelmed and humbled, flanked by the mayor and the victims' families, including Sarah and her father, who watched from a wheelchair, his eyes filled with a gratitude that needed no words. A month later, Maya was back at St. Jude's, wearing the dark blue scrubs of a charge nurse. She was leading a briefing, and the younger nurses listened to her with a respect that had nothing to do with her title. At a press conference she had called herself, she made a final announcement. The thousands of dollars in donations that had poured in from around the country would be used to establish the Samaritan's Shield Foundation, a non-profit dedicated to providing legal aid for people who face legal trouble for helping others in an emergency. That night, driving home, she took the newly renamed bridge. The permanent sign was up now, gleaming under the streetlights. Maya Castillo Bridge. She looked at her name, a quiet smile playing on her lips. The bridge was just steel and concrete. The real legacy was the change she had fought for, the shield she had built for the next person who, seeing trouble, chose not to look away.